Architecture is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are listening to Architecture Talk. Each episode we try and have a conversation with a contemporary thinker to advance the frontier of architectural thinking. Today I'm talking to my old friend and accomplished architectural thinker David Turnbull, who was for a long time faculty at the Cooper Union, which is where I met him, and now he's an intellectual and philosopher and thinker at large, most recently in the Los Angeles area. I caught up with him a few weeks ago, and I talked to him about his thinking about ecology, sustainability, and the state of architecture today. I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. Hi, David. Welcome to Architecture Talk. We'll begin with your observations and questions and critique of my book.
No. There's no critique.
Yes. Well, let's begin there.
No, I have no critique. I have it was very nice reading your book.
Thank you.
There are a couple of things that are in there that I wanted to bring up.
Fabulous.
But tell me, you've got an event that you're doing next week with Mark and Tony and
Partha Mitra and Sunil Khilnani. I don't know if you know those two guys. Partha is a fantastic art historian, and Sunil Khilnani is a historian, and he wrote a book called The Idea of India, which is a modernist Nehruvian kind of conception of idea, which became a national bestseller. And it was sold on the railway platforms for a long time.
Yeah.
But of course, now with the rise of neo-nationalism in India, he's out of favor. But nevertheless, I'm still very much in his fort or court or whatever.
Right.
Yes, so that's on the 24th. I hope you will, I don't know if you have the time, join us.
I will join you, yes.
The
big question is if Nehruvian modernism had prevailed, would the response to COVID have been better?
Who knows?
Because the building the hospitals and making the clinics and bringing public health and sanitation to villages and all of that stuff.
Yeah, well, India has good infrastructure, and I think the problem was hubris. Current government is so anxious to impress and so eager to say us too, and be entered into the global parliament of leading nations, simply while pursuing a decidedly parochial and anti-modern agenda back home. They handled the first wave quite well, actually, and did quite well. And, and unlike our former president, this guy is a demagogue, but still bows down to science and said, no, this is serious. We're going to take this seriously. But when they sort of got through the first wave, they're like, see, we did it. It's election time. And, it's all thanks to us. No, actually, all thanks to me. So I think, would that kind of hubris have prevailed in the Nehruvian state? I don't know. I mean, probably. I hope not.
I hope not. No, I think. I mean, I was looking at your father's agricultural college campuses, and they're so beautiful and so thoughtful and inclusive, and just astonishing that that dream gets replaced by something else, which is corrosive and competitive and non-inclusive.
So you saw the images in the book, the modernist 60s images, and you read them as inclusive.
Well, I think there was an idea, wasn't there, with the of inclusivity and mutual support and maybe with a strong government, but with the same consequences as the welfare state at its best in the UK, which was that principles of governance are set out in favor of the many rather than the few, and on the basis of equality of access. And so in that sense, I see it as inclusive, and I see the drive to, and the agricultural college campus plans seem to me to be perfect in that regard, and that they address a chronic need with a plan, which is a long-term plan, not a short-term plan, that doesn't fall into the traps that I'm over familiar with working in the non-profit area in countries in Africa, that there is a kind of false dependence on an idea of aid rather than of construction, and construction in favor of the many rather than the few.
Yes. Well, that was certainly the political vision, and some would argue the political aspiration, if not the realized reality.
Yeah.
But staying with the architecture, I mean, the critique that's often leveled, and you'll be familiar, was leveled in the late 60s and 70s and so on, was that the modernist idiom was itself, was not necessarily democratic and representative in that manner, or had to be, why couldn't it have been more Catholic in one sense, and encompassing of many communicative languages?
But that places a huge burden of responsibility on the architect to be able to speak in multiple tongues, or to engage, as your father and his colleagues did, as modernists, educated in India and also elsewhere, who collaborate on a vision that they presumably were passionate about. And it seems to me, from the quality of the work and the paintings and the drawings and the poems and everything in your book, and everything that I saw in your father's house in Chandigarh, in his studio, in drawers, in boxes and on the wall, supports the idea that there's some kind of hybridity that's possible, that draws, particularly in the paintings of the female form and the drawings of animals, that brings a personal consciousness into contact with universal ambitions of some kind, in order to make an architecture that is responsive to climate and place. And maybe I'm just being a naive modernist, but it seems
welcome to the club. I've learned from you.
Yeah, but it seems to me that everybody in that office had believed in the value of a project. And I think that one of the challenges that I find these days is that the project of modernity and of has become so corrupt, or to the point where it ceases to be a project and becomes self-aggrandizing, egotistical, narcissistic, and incredible in the worst sense, all over the world. And I find that reprehensible, whereas I find the work that your father and his colleagues did to be absolutely admirable and profoundly moving.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, two questions that occur to me is, but first let me dig a little deep into what you said. What do you mean by the project of modernity today? You're talking about sort of star architecture, or are you talking about the sort of new totalitarianisms around the world?
Well, I'm not. It's not. I don't think it's a matter of either or. I don't know. I've been reading Guy Debord again recently, partly because I have to write a short essay, very short, 800 words for the Biennale, and so I'm doing a project for a site in London. My work's going to be in a show which is 12 cities, 12 architects, 12 drawings. The exhibition's called Conceiving the Plan, and it's dedicated to the memory of a colleague of mine at the Cooper Union, Diane Lewis. And so my city is London. And my site, chosen with very little deliberation, I would have to say, simply because I was walking past it every day when I went in to teach professional practice at London Metropolitan University last year before COVID, was I would get out of the train at Aldgate East and walk past the Whitechapel Art Gallery, which is an extraordinary arts and crafts building, and also the place where This Is Tomorrow, the exhibition of the independent group, was installed. And there's an alley next to the gallery, which is fortuitously called Angel Alley. And in Angel Alley, and I'm, as you might know, quite fond of angels, as were some of my dearest friends in New York City. Angel Alley is also the home, not just of the Whitechapel Art Gallery's edition by Alan Colquhoun and John Miller and Richard Brearley from Colquhoun and Miller, but also it is the home of the Freedom Press. Freedom Press, established as an anarchist press in London at the end of the 19th century, and moved into East London, set up its press and its outlet in Angel Alley off the Whitechapel High Street at number, I think it's 84B Whitechapel High Street, and it's important that it's a B, and it's important that it's in Angel Alley, and in my mind, it's very important that it's next to the side entrance to the Whitechapel, with its legacy of radical art exhibitions from its inception, really, but also specifically This Is Tomorrow, which it seems to me was one of those canonical moments in the history of late modern architecture, actually, and followed a whole series of changes that were happening in architectural education, or anticipated them, and it was instrumental in providing the future that allowed me, as a grammar school boy, to go to architecture school and ultimately get involved.
Is your project about the future that's here?
Well, the project is about the future that's here now.
Yeah.
This is tomorrow, in a sense, or rather, this is today.
Yeah.
But also about ideas of freedom, creative freedom. What Colin Ward, who wrote for the anarchist press in London and was instrumental as a member of the editorial board of Freedom magazine, I believe. He and people like Patrick Geddes, imagined a future which would be built around what Colin Ward called the politics of propinquity, collaboration, cooperation, and shared values. And I see that as now increasingly as an important period for me when I was growing up. The atmosphere of the period was such that I was born in 1958, and so lived through as a very young child through the 60s, and then as a student in the 70s. And so for me, there was a sense of hope,
right?
And education in the UK was free for my generation, uniquely.
Yeah.
It was and there was there's something that's happened since, which is that sense of openness and a kind of flat society as well, non-hierarchical,
It's gone.
has gone completely.
Yeah.
And in Britain has been replaced by something which resembles the late 19th century more closely, without the social ambition. And across.
And this is what you're calling the new modernity of today? I mean, to bring it back?
That's the most problematic side of the modernity of the present, which I think needs to be attacked, if anything, in order to undo. And in fact, I would say the generation of students that we are teaching now and my daughter, who's 19, would certainly believe this, that they have no time for the society of the spectacle at its most debased and corrupt, as we see in a lot of the more extravagant architecture with its fascination with iconicity, that has so successfully displaced the ambitions of the early modern period that I find it quite extraordinary that.
So you're making a kind of an argument about, in a sense, the restraint, accompanying rigor of the 60s architecture, for instance, in my book on my father's work, as contrasted to the sort of the flashy iconicity of today, as representative of the, not just the aesthetics, but really the ethics of the times, which is the society of the spectacle in a sense.
Yes.
But also connected, are you also connecting it to sort of the media, the sort of the TikTok society, or where does this go?
Well, I think that that's part of it. I have been struggling with how to embrace an architectural milieu, which I see certainly in my work that I've been doing with friends in Turkey, where there is the architectural education has, without wanting to be too controversial, it seems to me that it's embraced social media to the point that the design follows Pinterest rather than thoughtful scholarship. That there is an obsession with the image that predicted by people like De Boer in the late 50s, early 60s, that means that images without attribution float into the design process in commercial offices in such a way that all of those old-fashioned values to do with tectonic integrity, to do with climate responsiveness, compositional clarity, and so on, have been replaced by cut and paste and a kind of assemblage of pictures rather than the construction of
ideas,
real, authentic, meaningful places. And I find that maybe I'm jaded, but I see that as being a more general symptom of cultural exchanges that have accelerated to the point where the authorship of the image is no longer of consequence. It's the image itself that matters, and then the image only at the service of a mood, and that mood has replaced a connectedness to atmospheres and things that I'm familiar with.
Let's talk about authorship. And earlier you used the word attribution as key values. And I'm thinking of James Sterling. And you know his work very well, of course. Why is that a key attribute for you? Referencing, interreferencing, authorship, attribution. Why is that critically important?
Well, I worked in Sterling Wilford for 10 years, and in fact, I moved there. It was my second job after graduating. I worked for 1 month at Arup Associates, and then transferred sideways, I suppose, into Sterling Wilford, which at the time was 15 people, and so we could all sit around a dinner table, which was very nice. Why do I think that authorship matters? Do I believe that it does? I'm not so sure that I did until I started to work in a situation in which the mood board became an instrument in the communication of design intent to clients. And then I found myself being incredibly perplexed by the way that current architectural media, the way that images are disseminated through a medium which is then can be, where an image can be displaced from its original location, if such a thing exists, pulled across onto another platform, and in being pulled across to another platform ceases to belong either to the media outlet that produced the image in the first place, the photographer that took the photograph, or the designer that designed the situation that's being photographed. And I found that kind of systematic displacement of origins from one place to the next, and the disentanglement of the image from any real reference in terms of temperature, humidity, light quality, the specificity of the circumstances in which the original place was made, in order that it can be put forward as an indicator of a desired mood, where mood alone mattered. I found that very, very frustrating and difficult, and also meant that the designers involved didn't have to think about why buy the image. And I think that I've been reading Agamben on anarchy simply because of my project for Venice, but I think he says something rather extraordinary and problematic for me, but also interesting, to do with the relationship between Christianity and capitalism, and the relationship between the word and the thing, or the word and the image, and in relation to the production of a work of art. And also he complicates the idea of anarchy by reminding the reader that anarchy means without foundation or without beginning. And so I've been thinking a lot over the last few weeks and days, because I'm writing, about what it means to work without foundations and without beginnings, and where the foundations might have been or might be, and what we do as those foundations become less secure. And I certainly see that in relation to this common contemporary practice now of building a Pinterest board, or building a series of image references detached from their origins, that the question of the foundations and foundational principles in relation to architecture becomes an issue that was never an issue, I believe, for the architects of your father's generation.
No, quite true, but I'm going to try and connect two or three things from my biography and your biography, and see if they can all come together and try and put it into a question. Modernism is itself accused of often working without foundations in the question of referencing, right? And certainly other people have remarked, when they have looked at those images of the agricultural college, about their tabula rasa-ish attitude. And I'm thinking, you probably were, when Sterling was in the jury, which recommended Lerner for the IGNCA, the Indira Gandhi, what was it, Center for something yes, on the main Rajpath in Delhi, which, I'm not sure if you're up, but it's slated to be destroyed. It's going to be erased with this new sort of neo-colonial structure. And there's a whole discussion on the architecture of democracy in India, which is like a massive controversy. But there was a stark difference between Lerner's approach in New Delhi, and which I suppose one would argue was a highly referenced approach, and the agricultural university campus And at that time, when I was I was a student of architecture when that project was coming up. It felt like a direct critique of the era of the 60s. But now that we have, 40, 50 years behind us, even on the Learner project, is it 40 years? Yeah, it is 40 years.
Amazing.
Would Sterling have liked the Agricultural College campus?
Oh, goodness me, how can we say? But if I compare your father's agricultural college to Sterling's thesis at Liverpool University, and then believe, as I do, that the motivation for making that thesis was a deep admiration for specific moments in the history of the heroic period of modern architecture, as the Smithsons called it, that I believe that he would have loved the Agricultural College, particularly all of the geometrical games of linear buildings offset against diagonally displaced objects, circles against chopped off circles, positioned in relation to long bars with a lot of surface articulation, balconies pulled in and out, and responses to orientation, which lead to astonishing chiaroscuro effects, light and dark, and that there were moments in my time in the office in Gloucester Place and also on Fitzroy Square that where a series of explorations had maybe run its course, and where there was a period of reflection, and which would lead to a reassessment of the work of the past, and then to allow us to go backwards in order to go forwards. And one particular moment for me, which doesn't relate explicitly to your question, but is obliquely related, was when the competition for the big library in Paris, Mitterrand's library, had been submitted, and the winner was announced, and it sent a shockwave through the Sterling Wilford office, because Dominique Perrault's building obviously was so completely at odds with everything that the scheme produced by Sterling Wilford represented, where the Library of France as a singular composition with 4 towers around a piece of native woodland displaced from another part of France and brought into the center of a courtyard with the extraordinary L-shaped towers marking each corner in a robust and monumental composition, compared to Sterling's project, which was a distribution of elements, geodesic domes, as a quotation of a library by Boulez, so a library within a library, a series of pavilions, each of which was had a specific geometrical scheme of superimposed solids, which are then related to a parterre garden stepping down to the Seine. That assemblage of discrete objects arranged in a more or less rigorous but also picturesque manner in favor of the reader and of the pleasure of being in a specific place at a specific time, in contrast to Perrault's project, which I've worked in, and the contrast is stark.
Right.
The status of the reader and their book in Perrault's library is radically different from the reader's relationship with a book in Sterling's proposition. But at the same time, we all realized that the world had changed. And so the projects that I was working on at the time, Tokyo International Forum, with Obayashi in Tokyo, the Kyoto railway station, a project in Seville in southern Spain. We used the failure, in a way, of the Library of France competition entry as a provocation to recuperate the energy and tectonics of Cambridge, Leicester, and Oxford.
How did you change? What was the new response?
Well, to return to assembling objects in a way that was more like, well, hopefully, in a sense, more like Leicester or Cambridge history faculty library, and actually less to do with assembling citations and quotations, to go back to your original question, and more to do with looking back at Sterling and saying, okay, well, then maybe there's some internal logic that can be worked with that would lead us somewhere new, but that was in a way less decorative, less dependent on historical types, more speculative, and it was a very refreshing moment, actually, that in the office, that the office divided into those the people who were working on Number One Poultry and some other projects in the UK, which were explicitly drawing on references to the work in Stuttgart and the period of the museums, and then another group of people in the office whose work was explicitly referencing Cambridge history faculty, Leicester Engineering Building, and the very discredited Flâneur building in Oxford. And my interests were clearly in that area. And actually, when Sterling died, and I stayed for a year or two and then left, came to the United States, that it was actually that there were two things that became important. One, which was recovering from the experience of being in Sterling's office, and the other was to actually find that that the architecture that I really enjoyed working with and making, in relation to its geometrical composition and construction and structure, and obsession with structure in particular, was something that I could hang on to and wanted to work with myself, and became very, very useful working in situations in very poor communities in Kenya and Ghana, where there was very little money, and where accessiveness was obviously not a possibility, neither was complicated construction. And I found something very, very provocative and also oddly reassuring about the way that we used to work assembling geometries, superimposing geometries in the Sterling office, that then became something for me personally. So I don't know whether that goes anywhere near addressing questions of authorship and reference, except that for me, as somebody who likes reading, that remembering where the word came from, or the particular. Actually, I'm reading Marius the Epicurean as well at the moment by Walter Pater, and he talks about happy phrases, and I like that idea. And I think buildings have happy phrases as well, and I like to know where the particularly happy phrase came from, but also where it might be taken.
So let's turn a little bit to what you are doing. And I was reading this musing, I suppose, called Today, which you wrote on the lawns of UVA or somewhere
Oh yeah,
there.
that's for a book of Peter Waldman's called Connective Tissue. It was the introduction to that book. I've been one of the curses of being the age that I am is that I get asked to write prefaces. And
let's read. This whole notion of you as a reader and what is a reader and referencing and so on that we have been talking about. I don't know if you. Well, here, I'll just share it for you. Would you read this opening paragraph for me? And then we're going to talk about it. Here, let me share it for you.
Okay.
If you don't have it, how about here? Can you see it?
Oh, yes. Oh, dear.
So I wonder if you would read just aloud this paragraph, the opening paragraph, starting with the today and I am weary, etc., up to I need time. And then let's talk about it.
Okay, this is where I discovered that the punctuation is strange, as you discovered as you were reading. So this is the first paragraph of a very short introductory essay for my friend Peter Waldman's book. Today, I am weary of wandering and have decided to stay in Charlottesville, Virginia for the winter to read and write. My library here includes books that I read at school, Ovid's Metamorphoses, Virgil's Eclogues, and Milton's Paradise Lost. I had a great teacher, a dissenter, but missed so much. Of course, I've read Chatterton's African Eclogues from 1769, Wordsworth's poems, 1815, and Coleridge's extraordinary Kubla Khan, that was finally published in 1816 after 18 years of rumors. Currently, I am reading fragments from the English translation of the Bhagavad Gita every day as I struggle with ideas like duty and liberty. This works as a form of meditation and has taken the place of the Bible next to my bed. My friends and colleagues are arguing constantly, as is proper, vexed by news from France, but excited by a recent spate of publication, including the young English poet John Keats' odes to Psyche, to a Nightingale, on melancholy, to autumn. His magnificent ode on a Grecian urn has caused some consternation. My imagination is on fire, but some illusions remain opaque. I need time.
Wow. I mean, look at the amazing collage of references. All the things you're reading. You jump back and forward in time.
Yes, but I was reading 200 years ago as well, which
only adds to the layering of the writing.
Yes, possibly. I mean, in the present tense, when I was writing that, I was reading T.S. Eliot, who I read quite frequently, who also read all the books referred to, and also I was conscious of and remain conscious of the relationship between the American Revolution and the French Revolution in relation to architectural history, yeah. and frankly the agency of British people in shaping the architecture of America, working in collaboration with Jefferson and co. And so I see why you've asked me to read that, because its breadth, but also oddly its narrowness, that it connects specifically for me to a tradition of English reading and writing that actually started for me as a child when I realized that the tiny village that I grew up in on the south coast of England was where T.S. Eliot spent his summers in the period of the closing stages of World War I, and wrote privately in his letters about experiences that he'd had in the pub in the village that was still there when I was a child, and with the fishing community that was still alive, not the same people obviously, but the community was alive when I was a child, and then was systematically replaced by tourists and trippers and others who displaced the agricultural and aquacultural economic base of the village. And I suppose this is why I have a particular relationship with that agricultural college project of your father's. It's because I grew up in an agricultural community.
I didn't know that.
on an estuary where, at the time of the Claudian occupation of England, of Britain, that the Romans cultivated oysters in the shallow waters of the estuaries around where I grew up. And when I was a child, if I was swimming or in a small boat and capsized, that I would end up standing on Roman oyster beds or the middens of, oyster shell that had been disposed of at the time of the Roman occupation of the southern part of England. And that, in combination with the fact that I grew up on, not literally on a farm, but in a farming community on the water, that was being systematically transformed through my childhood and early teens by big companies like IBM arriving and setting up shop on the south coast of England and completely altering the logic of life itself, that the way that people made money, what they did, kind of people I was surrounded by, the people I was at school with, it changed. And I think about that a lot. And when I went to Chandigarh and to see you and to participate in a workshop at the College of Architecture with your students, I found it profoundly moving that there was an idea about the future that was complicatedly self-evident in the enormous, the superblock plan, but also in the way that informal settlements and informal patterns of occupation were beginning to displace or interfere with or could become combined with the patterns that were put in place by the Nehruvian project, contact with tradition and with pre-existing cultural habits, that it was in that collision somehow made sense to me in relation to my own experience. That the village church where I grew up is in the Bayeux tapestry. There's a drawing of it in the Bayeux tapestry with Harold King praying before going to meet William the Conqueror at the battle in Hastings, and in 1066. And there's a sense for me that there are these incredibly important deep continuities in the history of architecture, which I consistently feel the need to draw back into my experience of the present. And that's why, when I was writing that piece for Peter, that to position myself 200 years ago in order to start writing and to imagine what I might have been reading then and hearing in the news from France and thinking of as I was sitting in America, that I was actually sitting in America in the present day, actually reading the books that would have been read by that version of myself that lived 200 years prior. And that the reason that I was reading them was not because of being hundreds of years old, but rather because I was introduced into a way of thinking about architecture and design, reading and writing by people who had been inspired by, like Sandy Wilson, for instance, who had a decisive impact on me as a student, not because I was taught by him, but because he was reflecting on issues of tradition, reference, authority, reading Eliot, and presenting an alternative tradition of modern architecture that I believe is sufficiently rich and complex, and that I see evidence of in the work of the Indian architects, specifically in Chandigarh and elsewhere, where ideas, where that the problem of language, is this something which we could identify as specifically Corbusian? I would say no. I would say you could identify it as something in which there are some graphical and compositional habits, perhaps, that persist, but they maybe persist for a reason. I found your father's drawings of the modular completely captivating in that sense. Really? In that having to draw the modular, explain it in hand drawings for the benefit of making a presentation to others about proportional principles, and then developing a way of thinking about modularity, scale, proportion, the relations to the body, that was nuanced in relation to Indian subjectivity, Northern Indian subjectivity, whatever it happened, I don't know. That slow process of translation seems to me to be incredibly important, and does two things. One of which is that it values the origins of the way of thinking, but also translation constructs another reality. And I mean, the drawing I liked most, my favorite drawing of your father's, is actually it's of a foot, and it's an invitation poster for a play.
Oh yeah.
By the Abinet Theatre Group.
Yeah,
and it's a right foot, and it's a beautiful thing that I relate to for all sorts of different reasons. Not least because I at one time in my life I collected drawings of the undersides of feet because of their importance in relation to reflexology. And when I started traveling a lot in Sterling's office, and I was traveling to Japan or to Singapore or to Spain, the pressure centers of the feet in relation to the organs of the body in Ayurvedic medicine, in acupuncture, acupressure, geomancy, the geomancy of the body.
And in the art of sensual massage, by the way.
And in the art of exactly. And so the agency of the erotic, the psycho-energetic, whatever it is, seems to me very, very present in the annular rings and spirals that your father draws into that foot. And as we probably all know from massaging the feet of others, that there are certain places where if you put pressure on exactly the places where he draws the centers of the spirals, that those spirals are not just confined to the footprint. Those spirals extend outwards and outwards beyond the foot to other organs in the body, and ultimately to the environment that we are surrounded by, and then into the larger world. And I think there's something really fantastic about that drawing, because it's also, it has a frame, but the frame loosely follows part of the foot, but not the toes. And then within that frame, there are other little tiny spirals marking the edge of the footprint, but also suggesting that that every spiral produces another one at another scale. That there's a fractal geometry of erotic energy that is drawn into and out of that foot. And so it became, I was transfixed by it, actually. I thought it was a wonderful thing, and I didn't remember seeing it before, and I was thinking of it in relation to a little book of free verse that you gave me when I was with you in China, in which there's the same sense in relation to the word, or as I see in that drawing of the foot, in relation to the spiral, that the words are very promiscuous. They're acquisitive. They are hungry for associations with other words, in the same way that those spirals are promiscuous in relation to the organs of the body, and the body's relationship to its surroundings. And I think that I see that too in his, and I think your fascination with not a serpentine in the English Romantic classical sense, but a curvy, linear, wandering line that I have also noticed in the work that you have been doing with Mark Jarzenbeck for the Venice Biennale, that there's something in this voracious, hungry, voluptuous,
continuous line. Yeah, promiscuous, continuous line. I love your phrasing. I love your phrasing, David. I've always been enraptured by your phrasing, and I like this idea of promiscuous line much better than the well-referenced line, because promiscuity offers both a connection and a infidelity to the present, right? It's not single-handedly reverential, right? I mean, it offers a carnivalesque rethinking, and or offers the possibility of, let's say, forbidden pleasure.
Yes. Well, yes,
that is a rich notion. That is a rich idea, I think.
Well, I think maybe that begins to come back to address more properly the question you start with. And I think in your book there is the continuous line, one continuous line, and I think that singular continuity is. And again, go back to that drawing of the foot, that drawing can be made. And I think your father did these things where he would actually set himself a discipline to draw, and maybe you refer to this, I can't remember, to draw without taking the pen.
Yes, for sure.
And that there's something about that, and it's more than Paul Clay's taking a line for a walk. It's just about taking the line for a walk. It's that line is about I think promiscuity is a good word for it, because it's about desire, and and it has a quality. It's not going for a walk, it's hunting.
Yes, it is hunting.
It's hunting.
It is hunting.
Yeah. And also, sorry about the wordplay, but it's haunted as well as hunting. It's got sides to it. It's carrying with it immense scholarship and thoughtfulness, and at the same time, a complete openness and voracious appetite for things that are new. And I think that, that, as much as I hate what Eliot did in his lecture at the University of Virginia, I can't remember where it was now, but it was overtly racist and anti-Semitic and disgusting in every way. And I couldn't set that aside. And for years, I felt that despite my earlier admiration, I had to leave him alone. But then I went back, and I find that same appetite for some kind of authentic experience of the disturbing realities of being in the present as completely the right as the right place to be comfortable in with all the difficulties intact, with the here and now, in such a way that it is possible to find a way of thinking about it which is serene, peaceful, moving, and actually ultimately politically progressive, and not either anchored to over slavishly to pre-existing
imagined pasts,
or imaginary pasts,
yeah.
And that it is possible in that present moment to know that whatever this thing about tradition and reference and authority and so on has been put in its place. It's productive, but that in the present moment, in that pleasurable present, like the experience of massaging a foot, and that everything that goes with that there is something which is of the here and now, of the past, but also of the future.
Indeed, of anticipation and expectation. And as we move, we're almost out of time here. I want to come back to, or not, finish up with where you are in the present, so to speak. You talked about struggling with ideas like duty and liberty in this text, one quoting the Gita. And you as in this persona, the writerly, you end this section that I asked you to read with "I need time." And later on, I think you also go on to quote Thoreau and him at Walden Pond and all the things he's reading, and sort of a kind of a Buddhism and this and that.
And he practiced yoga.
And he practiced yoga. I did not know that he did yoga, but I knew he read, or I didn't know he actually did yoga. What are you up to? I know you've got all kinds of projects, but talk to me intellectually and let's say even spiritually. What are you doing nowadays?
Well,
what is your thinking at? Where is your thinking at?
Where's my thinking at? I am caught, as most people are, between the rigors of every day. I've just moved to California, but I'm still busy in Europe. I have 2 projects for the Biennale. One, the 12 drawings that I'm making for an exhibition in October, but also, and I think this is where your book, your thinking, and your continuous line clearly intersects with mine, is that I have been, over the last decade and a bit, been doing a lot of work with building rainwater harvesting schools in disadvantaged or remote communities in parts of Africa with no access to water, no infrastructure, poor educational resources, and so on. And I've over the last few years, I've been doing a number of things associated with that. One is that 4.5 years ago, I decided to write something about architecture, or my feelings about architecture, every day, and to post that thought, whatever it was, online. And just because it was there, I used Facebook. But the real issue for me was to have a meditative practice, which involved spending a small amount of time each morning thinking about where I was, and also, if possible, walking to see, wherever I was in the world, to see a building that I have been interested in the past or would like to be interested in, and to photograph it, post a photograph and write a few words. And I've done that rigorously every day now for 4.5 years, which has accumulated a huge archive of images and texts. Actually, I will declare now that little essay for Peter Waldman was actually a collage from short texts I'd written by walking around and being in Charlottesville and sitting on the campus and thinking about things that were going on, not least tragic events in Charlottesville, Virginia, a few years ago that ultimately led to Black Lives Matter.
Right.
In the world. And so I've been thinking and being there quite regularly and thinking about that a lot. So that piece it started as a collage and then got rewritten. So there's a line which is concerned with my wandering in various parts of the world, notably London, Paris, Istanbul, Charlottesville, Virginia, and the places which were the loci of my life over that 4-year period. I've been building, and this one school was named the greenest school on earth by US Green Building Council. But the idea of using minimal resources and building very inexpensively became a preoccupation for me, as did another kind of line, which leads from the earth into the sky and then back down to the earth. And as it is drawn, anchors the structure, a structure, catches the rain, shades people underneath it from the sun, and then draws that water back down into a tank, a cistern. And for Venice, I am building a continuous line from the earth to the sky and then back as a water system for the Giardino della Vergine next to the Italian pavilion. I've been on the advisory group, part of the advisory group for the Italian pavilion for the last 3 years, for the Biennale that would have happened last year, but was postponed because of coronavirus. And so I'm installing hopefully 3 lines in the garden in early September in time for the film festival, and then 12 drawings in October, which will lead to a symposium, which is called Conceiving the Plan, which will take place in middle of October, I believe. I'm working as a visiting expert strategic consultant with Arup in London before the coronavirus, and then there's been a hiatus, and I'm about to start work on that on the west coast of the US in relation to Pacific Rim urbanism, which is something I've become quite fascinated in and with, and was in the past, but have recuperated that line of work. So professionally, I'm working now more as a consultant. I have some teaching obligations, but less than I used to. And I'm preoccupied at the moment with general principles of ecosystem restoration. And I see that as being informed by my literary experiment as much as anything else. And in relation to the one of the issues that I brought up at the beginning of this conversation, in relation to rereading Debord and thinking about the spectacle and thinking about the Situationist project, which I feel increasingly close to, and my wandering clearly has an affinity with those Situationist to read, but also more than Baudelaire's Flâneur. It's just another way of walking, more like Descartes maybe. But anyway, with the principle that Debord sets out, which is that we don't just want to destroy art or destroy our culture, we want to remake it. The Situationists wanted to destroy art in order to remake it, perhaps. I'm increasingly interested in destroying architecture, in order to remake it. And I think that, and thinking back over my teaching career, particularly at the Cooper Union, where you and I would often meet for final reviews for thesis, is that I think that there is and was and always has been a very contrarian sensibility to the way that I think about things, and that is and one that's based on a principle that perhaps in order to make something anew, you have to break up what is before. And I believe that that's what your father's generation thought about too. I hope that I'm right there, that there was something to be destroyed in order to be remade, and in remaking the present in favor of the future, all sorts of new opportunities arise. And so I'm in, you asked from a spiritual standpoint, I would say that I am as pantheistic as I have ever been. I have found that breathing has become rather important.
Yes.
And my breathing practice is informed by reading the Upanishads and other expert guides to breathing, and to understanding the agency of breath as a vital force, without which we would not be alive, but also that sometimes, and I realized this when I was 5 years ago, I would frequently forget to breathe in the same way that I would often be so busy I would forget to eat. And so my spiritual practice at the moment is consisting of breathing and eating, and in a proper way at regular times of day, in order to be able to think more clearly. And I've also found that for me, walking, literally and metaphorically, has been profoundly important in terms of clarifying objectives, and developing a kind of reflexive practice that is based on all of those thoughts that we've been discussing, to do with connection and respect. And in that sense, I suppose the question of duty, which I think you pointed to, which I hope I'm quoting.
Duty and liberty.
I hope quoting myself correctly. Duty, that there is a duty to consistently believe in a principle of freedom, and that liberty and, or rather, so let's think of that again, that liberty and duty are not contradictory, that there is a duty of care to oneself and to others that involves maintaining a principle of freedom, creative freedom, and providing the resources that allow that freedom to be realized. And that's why I've become so fascinated by the writers, the anarchist writers of the end of the 19th century and all the way through to the middle of the 20th century, for precisely that relationship between a duty as a duty of care for the self and for others in favor of freedom.
All right. Well, we'll have to take a long walk one day, David, and comment on each other's breathing. It's been such a pleasure to have this long conversation with you. Yes.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Amelia Jarvinen. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions on new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us on our website, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Architecture Talk.